There are a lot of NBA players out there making more money on their contract than they're actually worth on the court. So in today's video, we're going to dive into every single NBA team's most overpaid player. Before we begin, I should remind you that just because a player is on this list does not mean they're bad. In fact, most of the players on this list are actually good players. They're just simply not worth the money they're being paid. Let's start with the Houston Rockets. Dorian Finney-Smith, who has 2 years and $26 million remaining on his deal. Now, this deal actually has an additional 2 years on it, but they are both team options, and there's zero chance the Houston Rockets pick those up. So technically, the Houston Rockets gave Dorian Finney-Smith a 4-year deal in this offseason, and he has repaid them by averaging 3 points, 3 rebounds, 1 assist on 32% shooting from the field and 27% from 3. This has been one of, if not the biggest bust signing of the summer, with him already being 32 years old and showing signs of a decline given he wasn't that good on the Lakers. It was a risky bet to sign him to a long-term deal, but the Houston Rockets did it anyway, and it has not worked out. With Kevin Durant, Jabari Smith Jr., Tari Eason, they're already loaded at the wing position, and it really didn't make much sense to splurge on Dorian Finney-Smith, but Houston thought he would be a good fit, a good veteran in their defensive scheme, which has just not been the case. He's been one of the worst players offensively in the NBA since returning from injury. For the Golden State Warriors, this is unfortunately going to have to be Jimmy Butler, who has 2 years, $110 million remaining on his deal. Now, we all know who Jimmy Butler is, or at least was when healthy. He's the guy who had the Miami Heat overperforming year after year, but obviously that's well in the past now. Jimmy Butler is 36 years old, turning 37 this year, coming off a season-ending ACL tear, in which he probably won't be back until midway next year. And what does a 37-year-old Jimmy Butler even look like coming off that severe of an injury? I just highly doubt at this point Jimmy Butler will be worth the $60+ million he's going to be making next year. Now, he's not a player that relies solely on his athleticism or his speed, so there's a good chance he could come back and still look pretty good. He's more of a methodical player, a guy who uses his instincts and his IQ to play really good basketball, not necessarily relying on how fast he is or how explosive he is. So I'm not going to doubt that Jimmy can be a valuable piece for the Warriors next season, just maybe not max contract level value. For the Charlotte Hornets, their most overpaid player is Josh Green, who has 2 years, $28 million left on his deal. This is a guy who's essentially a jack of no trades. He's supposed to be a 3-and-D wing, but he's not a great defender, and he's maybe an average 3-point shooter. So making $14 million a season on this current contract is definitely a steal for him and his agent, but a contract that the Charlotte Hornets probably are not too excited to be giving him, and I would expect him to be a big trade chip in the summer, given he'll be on an expiring deal. For the Chicago Bulls, this has to be Patrick Williams, who has 4 years and $72 million remaining on his deal. This is a former number 4 overall pick in the 2020 draft. It's safe to say at this point that he just has not lived up to those expectations, and he now has undoubtedly one of the worst contracts in the NBA, given he doesn't have many skills to his game outside of defense, in which he's not even a lockdown defender. He just has the size and the build to match up well with other forwards. As an all-around NBA player, though, he's just simply not worth $18+ million a season for the next 4 years. For the LA Clippers, I'm gonna go with Darius Garland, who has 3 years, $172 million remaining on his deal. Darius is a very good player, has the upside to be one of the best point guards in the NBA, but unfortunately injuries have set him back over the last few years. We've seen him make an all-star team, we've seen him shoot it well from deep, we've seen him run an offense, and we know what he can do with the ball in his hands, but unfortunately injuries continue to plague his career. He only got the chance to play in 26 games for Cleveland this year until he was traded to LA, and for the Clippers he's still dealing with nagging injuries, so not necessarily a bad contract for who he is as a player, just maybe a contract you worry about a little bit when it comes to his long-term health. For the Los Angeles Lakers, I'm gonna go with Jared Vanderbilt, who has 3 years and $37 million remaining on his contract. Now, Vando is one of the best overall defenders in the entire NBA. I'm not here to argue that, but he is a guy that is nearly unplayable in certain situations. He tends to get himself in foul trouble quite a bit, and he's not a good offensive player, especially not a good 3-point shooter. And for this Lakers team, when everybody is fully healthy and available, Jared Vanderbilt doesn't seem to get many minutes minutes, if at all. For the Dallas Mavericks, I'm going to go with Caleb Martin, who has 3 years and $30 million remaining on his contract. He has a $10 million player option in 2028 when he will be 32 years old, and it's safe to say he will be picking this up. Caleb Martin signed a pretty decent contract with the Philadelphia 76ers, and then they traded him for Quentin Grimes. Caleb Martin was already dealing with injuries and having a down year in Philly, and then he goes to Dallas and is even worse. Although he has his moments from time to time, at this point, he's closer to a minimum contract player than a $10 million player. For the Boston Celtics, I'm going to go with Sam Hauser, who has 4 years and $45 million on his deal. Now, the Celtics have one of the cleanest cap sheets in all of the NBA. They've done fantastic with their cap space, paying their finals MVP Jaylen Brown, paying Jason Tatum, paying Derek White, your big three, and the only guys outside of those three on this roster making really any money is Sam Hauser and Peyton Pritchard. But for this Celtics team, I kind of just had to pick one. For the New York Knicks, I'm going with Karl Anthony Towns, who has 3 years, $171 million remaining on his deal. Cat will also have a $61 million player option at the age of 32. Now, whether he finishes this contract with the New York Knicks or not, that's a discussion for another day, but he is, in my opinion, the greatest big man shooter of all time, and just in general, one of the most gifted and talented offensive big men we've ever seen. But he's entering his 30s, and we've already seen his scoring and his efficiency go down this season. It can be argued that the fit with the Knicks isn't perfect either, so the rest of this mega contract could end up being a headache for the New York Knicks. For the Toronto Raptors, let's go with Jakob Poeltl, who has 5 years, $123 million on his contract. Jakob also has a $27 million player option at the age of 34. If Jakob Poeltl is not worth $27 million right now, what made Toronto think he'd be worth it at 34? Yeah, I really don't know what they were thinking handing him this contract. Now, no offense to Jakob Poeltl, he's a solid big, a decent rebounder, a decent shot blocker, but nothing crazy. A guy you'd give 3 years 50, 3 years 60, maybe, but 5 years 123, Jesus Christ. Even with Jakob on this team locked down for the next 5 years, it still feels like the Raptors are missing their big man of the future. They have a really good and talented starting five, but obviously their weak spot is at the big man position, and he's getting paid one of the biggest contracts for a big man in the league. This season, in only 33 games played, Jakob is averaging 10 points and 7 rebounds on 69% from the field. Very nice, Jakob. But long story short, an aging, average, injury-prone big man is not worth the contract that the Toronto Raptors gave him. Next, for the Utah Jazz, let's go with John Konchar, who has 2 years and $12 million on his deal. Now, John Konchar was a solid role player in the early Memphis Grizzlies days with Ja Morant, but at this point, for a team that might actually be trying to win some games, he shouldn't be anything more than a piece off the bench getting 10 minutes. And I suspect the Jazz will be actually trying to win games next year, given they'll probably have a top 5 pick in the draft, plus Triple J, plus Lauri Markkanen. They've actually built a solid roster, and John Konchar is unfortunately the only, I guess, bad contract on the team. For the Detroit Pistons, Caris LeVert, who has 2 years and $29 million on his contract. Like the Dorian Finney-Smith signing, this was one of the biggest bust signings of the summer. He was brought in to replace Dennis Schroeder, who provided solid defense and some playmaking off the bench. Caris LeVert does not do that. He's very lackadaisical with the ball, turnover prone, also prone for bad shots, not a great shooter. He's just not been a good fit for the Pistons. This season, Caris is averaging 7 points and 3 rebounds on 42% from the field and 34% from 3. I think the Pistons expected more consistent shot making with Caris LeVert, and unfortunately he just has not provided that this season. Although he is prone to the occasional blow up games, he'll go out there and give you 30 for no reason at all. So maybe he shows out at the tail end of the season, or maybe he plays really good in the playoffs, but either way, as we stand right now, Caris LeVert is the worst contract in Detroit. For the Sacramento Kings, this has to be Zach LaVine, who's on a 2-year $96 million contract with a $48 million player option to accept in the summer, presumably. Now, he could decline this option and test free agency and maybe get long-term money somewhere else, but after coming off a season-ending injury and a down year, I don't expect anybody to pay Zach LaVine real money, so he'll probably just pick up that player option. And for the Sacramento Kings, that's not good news at all. This team seems to be headed towards more of a rebuild. They're one of the worst teams in the NBA, fighting for the #1 overall pick, and obviously having Zach LaVine on your team for almost $50 million next year is going to hold them back a bit. Now, Zach LaVine is a good player, player, just simply not worth that amount of money. He's a good shooter, actually one of the most efficient shooters in the league when he's healthy, but he's not a guy that can get you many wins in the regular season, not a guy who has really been a contributor to any team winning basketball over his career. So yeah, one of the worst contracts in the NBA, but definitely not the worst. We'll get into the worst later. For the New Orleans Pelicans, this has to be Jordan Poole, who's on a 2-year, $66 million deal. The Pelicans traded CJ McCollum's expiring contract for Jordan Poole in hopes that maybe he can become a CJ McCollum level player, and he's also on a longer term deal, so you retain him. But that just has not been the case. I don't even think Jordan Poole's been 25% of a peak CJ McCollum. That trade has aged terribly, as Jordan Poole is now out of the rotation entirely, but when he was playing, he wasn't playing very good at all, averaging 13 points and 3 assists on 37% from the field and 33% from 3. And obviously, needless to be said, he's not a good defender. He just doesn't provide hardly anything on the court if he's not scoring, and with the scoring, he's been very inconsistent. For the Phoenix Suns, their worst contract is Jalen Green, who's on a 3-year, $106 million deal and will have a $36 million player option in 2 years. Now, Jalen Green, the talent, when his shots are falling and he's in a groove, can be worth that level of money, maybe one day, but we all know the issues with Jalen Green's game. He's not a very efficient shooter, and he's also one of the most inconsistent players in the league. One night he'll give you 35 points and look like a star, the next night he'll give you 8 points. And this has been the case with him in both Phoenix and Houston. And for Phoenix, he's only played 22 games this year. He's been dealing with an injury all year long. And in those 22 games, he's averaged 17 points and 3 assists on 39% from the field and 29% from 3. He's a guy who has all the physical tools and the capability to become a max contract level player, but unfortunately he's just not that right now, yet Phoenix are still paying him like he is. For the Milwaukee Bucks, I'm gonna go with Miles Turner, who signed a 4-year, $110 million deal in the summer. This contract does not look very good for the Milwaukee Bucks at all. Not only did they give Miles Turner this mass amount of money, they also waived Damian Lillard and stretched his deal out over the next 5 years. So they actually gave up even more money on top of the contract they're giving up Miles Turner to land him, and let's just say he has not been worth that whatsoever this season. As the starting big man for the Bucks in 64 games, he's put up 12 points and 5 rebounds on 44% from the field and 38% from 3. Now, the reason why Milwaukee wanted Miles Turner so bad was because we've seen the best out of Giannis when he has a stretch big next to him, a center you can rely on to knock down the three-pointer, and Miles Turner is one of those guys. However, shooting 44% from the field as a big man is not acceptable, and he's also just a flat-out terrible rebounder for his size. Now, when both him and Giannis have shared the floor together, they've looked fine, but at no point this season has Miles Turner looked like a guy who's worth $110 million. For the OKC Thunder, I'm gonna go with Alex Caruso, who's on a 4-year, $80 million deal. I'm gonna make this short and sweet. OKC is one of the best, they're the best team in the league, and they don't have a single bad contract on their books, so we're gonna go with Alex Caruso, who has a $23 million player option at the age of 34, so maybe there's a chance that contract isn't great 3 years from now. I don't know, but shout out to Alex Caruso. I'm not hating, I swear. For the Denver Nuggets, I'm gonna go with Christian Braun, who is on a 6-year, $130 million contract. Now, Denver coughed up a ton of money for Christian Braun a few months ago, and this season, dealing with injuries and seeing the floor inconsistently, he hasn't necessarily paid them back in his first year. He's only played 34 games this season, averaging 12 points and 3 assists on 50% from the field and 30% from 3. Now, I think Christian Braun is a fine player. He's a good fit with the Denver Nuggets for sure, but you paid him a really large amount of money, and I don't necessarily understand why, because what do you think Christian Braun's ceiling is? He's not a guy who's great with the ball in his hands. He's not known for creating his own shot, more or less just being great in transition and eating off of Jokic. So am I saying Christian Braun is a bad player? Absolutely not. He's a really solid defender as well, just not worth $130 million in my opinion. For the Washington Wizards, this has to be Anthony Davis, who's on a 3-year, $175 million contract. He also has a $63 million player option at the age of 34. I love Anthony Davis, one of the best defenders I've ever seen with my own 2 eyes, but there's not a chance in hell he's a $63 million player at the age of 34-35. This season, in 20 games played for the Dallas Mavericks, AD averaged 20 points and 11 rebounds on 50% from the field and 27% from 3. Heat. Now, we all know the deal with Anthony Davis at this point. We've seen him win a championship as a top 2 option, but that was 6 years ago. And since that season, AD's only put more tread on the tires. He's dealt with more and more injuries, and it really feels like you can't rely on him to play more than 5 games in a row without dealing with something. Now, for the Washington Wizards team, I'm not too worried about this deal, as you really bought low on Anthony Davis and got him for pennies on the dollar. And if you could get him to stay healthy next to Trae Young, this could be an interesting team, and I wouldn't mind paying Anthony Davis, especially since it looks like Alex Sarr and Keshawn George are the only 2 young players you're going to have to give big money to eventually. So I don't think Anthony Davis's contract is going to hold them back or anything, but it is a lot of money to pay a guy who is aging and is one of the more injury-prone players in the NBA. For the Brooklyn Nets, I'm going to go with Terrence Mann, who's on a 3-year, $47 million contract. The Brooklyn Nets are going to be one of the few teams with cap space this upcoming summer. They don't have really any big guys they're paying money to on their team besides Michael Porter Jr., Nick Claxton, and Terrence Mann. And for the contract that Terrence Mann is on, $47 million over 3 years, I mean, that's nothing crippling to a team, but it's definitely an overpay for who he is as a player. T-Man is a 3-and-D wing guard combo who's not a great playmaker, not a great shooter, and not a great defender, so it just feels like he does a little bit of everything but at a mediocre level. He's a great locker room guy and can have some really solid nights on the floor, but I don't think he'll ever be worth $47 million. For the Minnesota Timberwolves, I'm going to go with Rudy Gobert, who's on a 3-year, $110 million contract. Now, do I think Gobert is overpaid for what he's providing Minnesota right now? Absolutely not. Even at this point in his later years, he's still a very good defender, Defensive Player of the Year candidate, one of the best rim protectors we've ever seen in NBA history. That's a fact. But for all the good that Rudy has provided Minnesota on the court, there's an equal balance of negatives as well. Offensively, we know his limitations. He can't make a jump shot, he can't shoot threes, let alone even make layups consistently. So when it comes to a playoff setting, we've seen it time and time again. He can get played off the floor in certain matchups, and he's definitely a bit slower on his feet given his size and his age. And there's reason to be concerned about paying Rudy Gobert $38 million when he'll be 35 years old. Will he still be a Defensive Player of the Year candidate by then? Will he get even worse offensively? Will he get even slower on his feet? These are things this team is going to have to worry about. This is the second biggest contract on the squad beside Anthony Edwards, and it's a contract that I wouldn't be surprised at all if Rudy Gobert finished on another team. For the Atlanta Hawks, let's go with Buddy Hield, who's on a 3-year, $27 million contract and has a $10 million player option at the age of 34. Now, Buddy Hield was having a down year with the Golden State Warriors. He's primarily known for just being a 3-point shooter, and he was shooting 34% from 3. So he gets traded to Atlanta for Kristaps Porzingis, and he has only played in 3 games, averaging 5 minutes a night, and he hasn't made a single 3. With Nickeil Alexander-Walker, Dyson Daniels, Jonathan Kuminga, Zachary Risache, there's just not much opportunity for Buddy Hield to go out there and play the wing spot. So he's basically just a salary that's going to be included in another trade eventually. I wouldn't expect him to be on the Hawks for the next 3 years. For the Cleveland Cavaliers, I'm going to go with Max Strus, who's on a 2-year, $32 million deal. Now, for the value that Max provides on the court with the 3-point shooting and the solid perimeter defense, it's actually not a bad contract. But unfortunately, Max Strus has only played in 3 games this season. He's been dealing with injuries all year long, and last season he also missed 32 games. He's been quite solid for the Cavs, especially shooting the 3-ball. He's been very consistent in his role when he's out there, but that's the problem. He just hasn't been out there very much, and he's going to be turning 30 this month. For the Indiana Pacers, I'm going to go with Aaron Nesmith, who's on a 4-year, $63 million contract. Now, I'm actually a big fan of Aaron Nesmith's game. We all know what he provided to the Pacers during that finals run. Elite shooting, good defense. He was just incredible throughout that entire Cinderella run. But I kind of just had to pick one for this Indiana team who's been very smart with their cap space, paying now Ivica Zubac along with Pascal Siakam and Tyrese Halliburton. Other than that, nobody else on this team is making significant money that you would have to worry about. But Aaron Nesmith will have a $21 million player option at the age of 29. Last season, he shot 43% from 3, and this season he shot 36% from 3. Maybe that's a reason to be concerned. I'm really not. I kind of just had to pick one. For the Miami Heat, let's go with Nikola Jovic, who's on a 5-year, $66 million deal. The Miami Heat tried to get ahead of Nikola Jovic's future market by extending him early, and that just has not worked out well at all. Nikola Jovic this season season is averaging 7 points and 3 rebounds on 37% from the floor and 27% from 3. He's been overall one of the worst offensive players in the entire NBA this season, but we've seen him play decent basketball before. Last season he averaged 10 points on 37% from 3, so we know there's at least maybe a role player in there somewhere. But since getting that big payday, he hasn't even looked like an NBA player and has been cut out the Miami Heat's rotation. And this Heat team is not exactly the deepest team in the NBA either. He's just been so bad he doesn't warrant any minutes at all, which is such a bad look for the Heat front office because you just flat out did not have to pay him this early. But they believed in him as a project player who's been studying in their system over the last 4 years, but sadly this contract looks like a major bust. For the Portland Trailblazers, I'm gonna go with Jrue Holiday, who's on a 3-year $104 million deal. Jrue, even at this point in his career, entering his mid to late 30s, is still a very productive NBA player when healthy. In his first season in Portland, he's averaging 16 points and 6 assists on 46% from the field and 38% from 3. He's shooting the ball well. He's not the defender he once was, but he's still an above average one, and he's been a reliable starting point guard for this Trailblazers team who has exceeded expectations this year. So why exactly am I saying he's the worst contract on this team? Well, there's a few factors here. Jrue Holiday is 35 years old and will have a $37 million player option when he's 37 years old. Now again, Jrue has been playing quite well this season in his new role, but is he worth $30+ million? That's a question that can definitely be argued, and by the time he's 37 years old, will he be worth $37 million? Probably not, when you consider Damian Lillard, who's also on this team, is only making around $14 million a year. For the San Antonio Spurs, I'm gonna go with De'Aaron Fox, who's on a massive 5-year $260 million contract. Don't get me wrong, the Spurs trading for De'Aaron Fox at last year's trade deadline made a ton of sense. You didn't have to give up too much value for him, and ideally he's a perfect fit next to Victor Wembanyama. He's one of the most fast, explosive, and physically gifted point guards we have in the NBA, but is De'Aaron Fox $260 million good? I would argue against that. This season he is averaging 19 points and 6 assists on 48% from the field and 34% from 3. Now we've seen De'Aaron Fox go out there and put up 50 points. We've seen De'Aaron Fox average 26 over a whole season, but with this San Antonio Spurs team, I don't think we'll ever see that version of De'Aaron Fox again as far as the scoring goes. There's just so many offensive options on this team who are currently a top 2 seed in the Western Conference. You also have Dylan Harper, who you drafted top 2 in the draft this year, along with Stephon Castle, who's made his case as a starter, and in my opinion doesn't look that much worse than De'Aaron Fox. So in all honesty, if the Sacramento Kings ended up giving De'Aaron Fox this $260 million, I could justify that. But for this Spurs team who's going to be looking to compete for championships all throughout Wemby's prime over the next 10+ years, this De'Aaron Fox contract might actually hurt them more than help them. For the Orlando Magic, let's go with Jonathan Isaac, who's on a 4-year $60 million deal. When Jonathan Isaac is healthy, he's one of the best overall defenders in the entire NBA. He's a good rebounder, a great shot blocker, and plays the passing lanes quite well. But the issue comes with his fit on the Orlando Magic. This is a team that lacks 3-point shooting and lacks offensive firepower in general. Jonathan Isaac has never been a reliably good 3-point shooter in his career, so it's hard to play him next to Franz Wagner or Paolo Banchero when neither of them are exceptional 3-point shooters either. And with the Magic already being a well-rounded defensive team, Jonathan Isaac's role isn't exactly that impactful. This season, in only 10 minutes a night, he's averaging 2 points and 2 rebounds on 42% from the field and 18% from 3. He's one of the worst offensive players in the league, and you can't find any minutes for him with a fully healthy team while you're paying him a $60 million deal. That's just not a good look. For the Memphis Grizzlies, let's go with Ja Morant, who's on a 3-year $127 million deal. At this point, it feels like Ja Morant never even existed. Over the last 3 years, he's only appeared in 79 games. And over these last 3 years, he's got less and less efficient, he's got more and more turnover prone, and he's got more and more alienated from the Memphis Grizzlies, to the point where it's almost a given, a guarantee that Ja Morant will be traded in this upcoming offseason. We thought he would be traded at the deadline, but reportedly there were no takers. Maybe a team is intrigued by who Ja Morant was in 2022 when he averaged 27 points a night, and they make a trade for him, but that's going to be hard to do for any team interested when he's getting paid $40+ million a season and as a $45 million player option in 2027. Now, obviously, hindsight is 2020, and for who Ja Morant was as a player at that time, it made complete sense to give him this big contract extension. But a few years later, after nagging injuries, his play continuously falling off a cliff, and of course the suspensions, you could argue Ja Morant's contract is one of the worst in the league. I saved the most overpaid player in the NBA for last, Paul George of the Philadelphia 76ers, who's on a 3-year, $162 million deal. This deal also has a $56 million player option at the age of 37. Now, as we stand right now, Paul George at 35 years old isn't even worth half of $56 million, so paying him that amount of money when he'll be 37 years old is just going to be such a hindrance for this Philadelphia team, who's also paying Joel Embiid's massive contract along with Tyrese Maxey. You will eventually have to pay VJ Edgecombe as well. Just imagine the team that Philly could build around that big three had they not given Paul George $200 million. Paul George this season is averaging 16 points, 5 rebounds, 4 assists on 42% from the field and 38% from three. Now, the stat line isn't actually too terrible, especially when you consider the role that he's playing, essentially being a 3-and-D wing, but he's only played in 27 games this year, and then he got suspended for another 25 games. The season prior, he only played 41 games, so he's also constantly at risk for missing games with injury, and I can't imagine that gets any easier on his body as he continues to enter his late 30s. Not only is Paul George the most overpaid player in the NBA currently, I could argue he's the worst free agent signing of all time. So a major mistake from Daryl Morey in the Philadelphia 76ers front office. But anyways, that's gonna wrap it up for me. If you guys did enjoy today's video, please be sure to hit the like button and subscribe. Thank you so much for making it all the way to the end of the video. Let me know what you guys thought about this list down in the comment section below, and I hope to catch you guys in another video soon. Until then, I'm out. Deuces.